Hey, what's going on, everyone? Thanks for watching my video today. Today, I'm here with a somber tone to my video. I'm here kind of to deliver a eulogy of sorts. It's kind of an emotional subject for me. I'm here to eulogize the Damian Lillard era Portland Trail Blazers because this is a franchise that I used to love watching year in, year out for pretty much the first, I'd say, 6 years I watched NBA basketball. My first year I watched the NBA, I was in the fifth grade. It was the 2014 season. Damian Lillard was in his second year in the league. He hit that crazy buzzer beater against the Rockets. That was the first time I kind of saw him in a true superstar light. I was like, oh, look at that big time shot. Aldridge left. Everyone was doubting Portland, but then McCollum came along. They formed that great backcourt, surpassed expectations that year. And then for the next 3 or 4 years, they were a really entertaining team. I loved their Western Conference championship run, the great series against the Thunder, and the Nuggets, that crazy 7 game series, and even in the bubble, they dealt with injuries that year. I even picked them to beat the Lakers because I was delusional. I was a Laker hater. It didn't happen, but Dame nonetheless had some really nice games in that bubble as well, especially against the Nets. I remember that being a really fun game during the COVID pandemic that summer. But that was 2 years ago now. And the past 2 years, what's happened to the Portland Trail Blazers is really unfortunate. And originally, as I said, I'm a big Dame fan. I was getting excited that potentially, Ben Simmons might be traded to Portland. We'd get Dame in Philly. Looks like things are heading towards James Harden or maybe even Bradley Beal at this point. Dame's had a rough year. He's been hurt. He's been shooting very inefficient. My guy McCollum, who I also love a lot, he's had a collapsed lung this year. He's been dealing with injuries. There's some trade rumors for them. But they just made this very, very bad trade with the Clippers the other day, and that's where I kind of want to look back at their past 2 years and really dive deep into what they've done that's really messed up the team. So coming off the bubble, they were bounced out by the Lakers in the 1-8 matchup, and it was coming off a year they had a lot of injuries. And what they did in that offseason, they wanted to address their defense. So they traded 2 first-round picks to the Houston Rockets for Sixer legend, one of my favorite players, Robert Covington. And I was really excited to see Cov go play with two guys I like a lot in Dame and CJ. Now, Portland, they got off to an iffy start in the 2021 season, but they made an interesting move at the trade deadline. They had Gary Trent Jr., who was coming off a really solid showing in the bubble. He caught a lot of people's eye. He was having a good season a year later in the regular season as well, but he was coming up on restricted free agency, and they knew they couldn't necessarily pay him the money that he would have wanted. So they traded him to Toronto for Norman Powell, and they stuck Rodney Hood in that deal as well to get rid of his salary. Now Powell wound up re-signing with Portland for 5 years, $90 million, and it looked like Portland had another solid guard, relatively young, similar age to Dame and CJ, and they kind of rebooted the team with Coven Powell as the new starting forwards on the team. And coming in this year, people thought hopefully Portland, they had a disappointing elimination last year, but hopefully Portland, they were trying to convince Damian Lillard to stay in town. They finally fired Terry Stotts, who I didn't think was a bad coach, but he had a lot of early playoff exits, so they brought in Chauncey Billups to be the new coach, try to re-energize the franchise this season, and it has not worked at all. They're having one of the worst seasons in Blazers history, probably in the last at least 20 years. There's very few Blazers teams I can remember that have been bad as this one. They're very sloppy. They've had some injuries, like I said. Dame and CJ being out certainly has hurt their record, but even when they were healthy, they weren't exactly as competitive as you would have hoped. And that's where it brings us to this absolutely perplexing trade they just made. This is a lost season, but that doesn't mean you punt on future assets down the road. They traded Covington and Powell, the two guys I just illustrated as important acquisitions that they gave up real stuff to get. They traded them to the Clippers, who also are, the Clippers don't have Kawhi and Paul George right now. They're also in a similar situation this year, but clearly the Clippers are still looking ahead while Portland is panicking and worrying about the present and their present record this year, which is strange. They trade Powell and Covington for Eric Bledsoe, who hasn't been an above-average player in 3 years, Keon Johnson, a 19-year-old rookie who could have promise but has proven absolutely nothing this year. He's not playing a lot. There's just nothing there. He's the 21st pick in the draft, not exactly a high pick worth trading these guys for. Justice Winslow had a lot of injuries, hasn't done much, and 2 second-round picks. So they essentially have traded Gary Trent Jr., who's having a great year in Toronto, and Robert Covington, or excuse me, Gary Trent Jr. and 2 first-round picks for Bledsoe and Winslow and Keon Johnson and 2 second-round picks. That is in a it's a mind-blowingly terrible trade. I understand that Portland has an interim GM right now after Neil Shea had to resign for that weird scandal that was kind of just thrown under the bus, but I guess that kind of epitomizes the last 2 years in Portland, how strange they have been. That the GM getting outs for workplace harassment has kind of already been slid under the table because they've had so many more issues since then. But it's just there's no argument anyone can make why this trade was made. Now, I saw someone say to get under the luxury tax, trade Nurkic then. Like or hell, trade Dame and CJ. That's what they should be doing. If you're gonna reboot the team, just do it. Don't like sure, Dame might not want to be traded, but don't drag your feet with this stuff. Maybe they have to trade Dame. If Dame's not gonna get traded, maybe they have to trade Dame. Maybe they have to swallow the pill. They can be the bad guys, because then Dame can even I don't know why Dame's so worried about everyone makes the jokes that he's not running from the grind, all that stuff. He's a legend in Portland. He could pull a Harden in the next week and act like how Harden did in his last few weeks in Houston, and Portland fans would still love him. He has done everything he can for that franchise, and he's been rewarded with one Western Conference Finals appearance where they got destroyed by the Warriors. I love Damian Lillard. I love the CJ McCollum, Damian Lillard backcourt, but it's time. It's time for it to be over, because there's no path forward for this team. And you can argue the trade they made, they're kind of acknowledging that, but I would argue Powell is locked up for 5 years. He's a good, relatively young player, 26, 27. You trade McCollum and CJ to get major assets, and you bring Anthony Simons, who's shown a lot this year, and Norman Powell as your new backcourt of the future. And maybe not for a championship, or at least for the next few years, you could have relied on those guys. Covington was one of their only good defenders. Despite his stats being worse than they were in Philadelphia, he's still a very good defensive player, especially off the ball. There's just no path forward, like I said, for this team. I don't know what the end goal is, but that trade was horrendous, and it really, I think, epitomizes the fact that this is an end of the era for Portland. And I don't know what's going to become of Dame and CJ. I saw a rumor maybe the Cavaliers trade for CJ because they want to fill that Colin Sexton spot. I would love that. I would love to see him on that Cavs team. But then Dame's still on the team. Then Dame's without CJ and Norman Powell. At that point, he's just rotting there. I can't even think of a star NBA-wise that I can compare to Damian Lillard staying in Portland without even a decent second player next to him. So I'm hoping Dame sees the writing on the wall and asks out, because sadly this Blazers era is over. It's dead. So that's all I got to say about the Blazers. It pains me to say it, but thanks for watching the video. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and enjoy the rest of your weekend. I hope Damian Lillard's enjoying his weekend right now. I don't think he is, but I hope he is.